And we begin today's program in Japan, where Japan's parliament re-elected Shinzo Abe as prime minister on Wednesday. His Liberal Democratic Party-led coalition won a decisive supermajority in the October 22nd election. Abe has served as prime minister for nearly 5 years, promising to reboot the state economy and also bolster defense. He is also expected to revise the country's pacifist constitution. Meanwhile, Abe plans to discuss DPRK's nuclear program with Donald Trump when the U.S. president visits next week. Before our discussion, let's take a look at this.
The names of the ministers have not changed, and the number of seats changed little, if not less than before the election. Many Japanese ask what was the point of spending billions of yen in the snap election. Experts say Abe bought himself time to pursue his interests in constitution revision. By holding the lower house election scheduled for 2018 early, Abe now has a whole year to dedicate his efforts in the debate without worrying about public support rate and risk of affecting an election. Abe will take the victory in this election as a public endorsement to pursue the revision of the Article 9 of the pacifist constitution.
The security environment surrounding Japan is so severe that it is not even an exaggeration to call it the worst since the end of World War II. We will do utmost to step up our national security measures.
Analysts say he's likely to submit a draft for the revision in a Diet session in January and aim for public referendum in 2019. On diplomacy, some experts say Abe is likely to focus his eyes on the neighboring countries, seeking progress in the joint development of the disputed Kuriles or the Northern Territories with Russia. Improvements in relationship with China and Republic of Korea, hoping to hold trilateral and bilateral talks with President Xi Jinping and Moon Jae-in at the earliest opportunities. Abe says he's keen to resolve the tensions with DPRK and advance in trade with the neighbors.
For more on Shinzo Abe being re-elected as the Japanese Prime Minister, we are joined in our Beijing studio, Xiyu, Senior Fellow of the Charhar Institute of International Studies. Welcome, sir. Joining us in Washington, D.C., we have Peter Kuznick, Director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University, also expert on Japanese history and nuclear issue. Welcome, sir. Also in Washington, D.C., we have from Japan originally, Yoshikazu Kato, who is a research fellow at the Charhar Institute and also columnist at the New York Times Chinese web edition. Welcome as well. Long time no see. Mr. Kato, I want to start with you. What about that re-election for Mr. Abe as the Prime Minister? How much is this likely to give him further boost to advance whatever is he having in mind earlier as his political agenda?
I think that was no surprise because Shinzo Abe in the last snap election actually he won. It's a big won. It's a great victory. That's why it is no surprise to be re-elected. And actually as we get to know, actually the new minister level, new cabinet is succeeded basically completely. So I think nothing is special and no any surprise. So the problem is how to tackle some difficulties. Actually, Shinzo Abe made a promise for the citizen. For example, he mentioned national difficulty. It's the North Korean threat or some Asian society. So how to tackle these difficulties? I think this is the main challenge for Shinzo Abe in the next.
Many from outside Japan just do not necessarily understand the complexity of the Japanese politics and how to read the temperatures of Japanese politics. For example, Prime Minister Abe may have secured a landslide victory for the ruling coalition, but approval rating to run the government has dropped. People don't understand. How should we look at this? A survey by Asahi newspaper shows that 47% of the respondents would prefer him resigning from his position as Prime Minister, with just 1/3 wanting him to stay on. Well, Mr. Kuznick, of course we understand, in different countries there are different kinds of political preferences, newspapers and media organizations. But when it comes to surveys, the numbers are really interesting, what I just read. How should we understand this?
I think we should understand that Abe is not personally a very popular political leader. He's taking advantage of a combination of domestic and international issues to call the election at a time that was most favorable, most propitious for him. But that does not reflect personal confidence in Abe as a leader. For a long time, his approval ratings were quite low, and there was optimism among those who were critical of him that he would have to resign as prime minister. However, the combination of an improved domestic economy and an international situation that seemed very ominous to many Japanese created this perfect storm where Abe was able to bring this majority there. That does not mean that Abe himself is very popular or that many of his policies are popular. In many ways, we can attribute this victory for Abe to North Korea. And North Korea is sending missiles over Japan and frightening the Japanese people into supporting Abe.
Right. This is an early election that Prime Minister Abe has called upon. And certainly he did it, as our panelists just suggested, at the best appropriate time for him politically. But Mr. Yang, what does it mean for China? I mean, when we talk about the DPRK issue, one critical difference between China and Japan, at least with the Abe administration, is that Abe administration promised the United States that it would assist the U.S. military strikes against the DPRK whenever that is being done. And yet China, Mr. Yang, you may know this very clearly, is fundamentally against any military strikes and conflicts on the Korean Peninsula and in Northeastern Asian region. So how does China see Abe, Prime Minister, come back to where he was?
Well, China's observation of Abe's political status quo in Japanese politics is quite mixed. On one hand, you're right. He won a landslide victory, but not because of he was popular, but because of the reasons Peter mentioned, but also because his opponents are too weak.
That's right.
So based on that picture, we don't worry about what kind of strong and tough policy and measures Abe can launch. However, we're really concerned about Abe's intention behind his too proactive attitudes towards North Korean crisis. Basically, the difference on North Korea lies in U.S. and China. Somebody saying, for U.S., all options on the table, but for China, all options but the military on the table.
That's right.
And unfortunately, Abe say the same with the United States by adding one more additional intention for Japan. Say, through military solution, they can gain a new platform to enhance their defense forces into the normal state.
That's right. Mr. Kato, though, if Prime Minister Abe acting tough on the DPRK issue, even suggesting further about so-called military strike against DPRK, will the majority of the Japanese public agree with it? Or actually the fluctuation of sentiment in Japan is going with, you know, how the media is portraying the crisis at the time? Will this be predictable or all the time unpredictable?
Yeah, I think this is not a choice for Japanese citizens and Japanese society, because Japanese majority can't accept the military strike, including preemptive action from Mr. Trump. That's why, you know, as an ally of the United States, we Japanese need to convince Mr. Trump not to strike militarily, and we need to resolve this problem with negotiation or some dialogue. So, because Japan is neighbor of North Korea, Korean Peninsula. So if something happens militarily in the peninsula, Japan will get involved in that, some kind of military confrontation or something like that, and this is not acceptable for Japanese society and even Japanese constitution. That's why I think Shinzo Abe, he is actually under the dilemma, because on the one hand he needs to convince Mr. Trump not to do this, but at the same time, he emphasized our difficulty, national difficulty in front of North Korea. But the problem is what ways? Actually we can't do anything independently. So I think this is the main topic in upcoming Trump's visit to Japan, I think.
Mr. Kato, to what extent, very briefly if you can, will the Abe prime minister be able to, let's just say, get both fruits? On the one hand, push forward even further the so-called the pacifist constitution out of the picture, to further revise it, with so-called danger coming from DPRK, and Japan's responsibility to help the United States if there were any military action. On the other hand, he could also use the Constitution, once revised in any degree, to support his suggestion to the United States that we could help you now. So how should we link these two together? Which is likely to be the next step he's going to take further? Mr. Kato, very briefly from you, if I can.
Yeah, the linkage you mentioned is really sounds strategic, because this is, I think, one of the biggest dilemma for Japan, I mean, since World War II. Because, Abe is trying to revise the constitution. This is his political goal, but, Japanese society and majority can't accept it. I mean, we want to follow the pacifism constitution. That's why Abe is trying to say we need to get consensus, not only the ruling party, but including opposition parties and even the public. And if we revise constitution, we need to implement the referendum. And and this is really difficult. This sounds difficult. I don't think this can be happened. But at the same time, like Shinzo Abe mentioned, our security surroundings is getting more serious, strategically serious, day by day, year by year. That's why how to tackle this dilemma, ambivalent situation. So I think now some political capital for Shinzo Abe is how to take advantage of the alliance with the U.S. And at the same time, we need to strengthen cooperation with China. I think this is the only way for Shinzo Abe to take in the future.
Whether Mr. Abe is going to do that, that's a big question mark, because we haven't seen that record for much over the past 5 years. And Mr. Kuznick, there's another card Prime Minister Abe could play with the United States. That is, he would seek the help to probably buy weapons from the United States to defend the so-called Diaoyu Island, which China and Japan certainly has territorial disputes, and be able to bolster himself politically back at home. How much is that, do you think, Washington likely to buy in, given the fact that there were the so-called rebalance that Washington was very fascinated earlier?
The United States is selling a lot of arms to India, to Japan, to other Asian nations. Part of this rebalancing we're talking about, for a while we talked about the pivot. Now we're talking about the Indo-Pacific strategy.
That's true.
And the United States is looking at India, Australia, Japan, to work with the United States for this new security challenge to China. It's the same old containment policy that we saw under the Obama administration, and now the Trump administration is putting a little bit of a different spin on it. So, but it still involves the question of containing China and challenging China's domination of the region. Japan is moving more troops to Okinawa. Now, Okinawa is located more strategically closer to the Diaoyu Islands, so they're positioning themselves for a potential confrontation over those islands. But it's part of this broader strategy that the United States has been adopting to maintain American hegemony in the area and to challenge China's domination economically in the area.
I see. Things, pictures are getting ever more complicated, Mr. Yang. Probably you should also come in as well from the Chinese perspective too. How does China look at all of these layers of possibilities? But on the other hand, there's another list. That list is things could go better if certain things can be done. For example, China and the United States, China and Japan be able to communicate with one another better and be able to work on some of the most important initiatives, whether about security or about regional or global trade. These could help, but with one condition, that is both parties want to push toward that direction. You never be able to know whether the other party wants to do that, but the question is, does China want to do that, and can China do that? Mr. Yang.
Well, actually, you are really touching a very interesting and sophisticated dynamics of the interactions among the 5 countries, say 4 against 1. For China's tactics and the policies, basic way is like this. When U.S. try to form the so-called united front against China by the 4 countries, and China is conducting more active policies towards the 4 individually, the 4 bilateral versus the 4-way formation. So we will try every effort to improve your relations with U.S., Australia, India, and Japan, and to set up the partnership, while the U.S. will try to forge a united front against China. But the interesting thing is, neither U.S. nor Japan really want to fall in a total confrontation with China. So on one hand, they want to contain China, but also they want to leave a way to cooperate with China. That actually make room for China to engage with the 4 countries individually for 4 partnership.
Interestingly, we've seen some latest development both in South Korea and in Japan. In South Korea, for example, the relations between Seoul and Beijing over just the past few days has been dramatically increased, given the THAAD system decision and also some of the rhetoric coming from the South Korean president. In Japan, too, people could argue, Mr. Kato, this is a new administration in a new term, at least. Even though with the same slate, all kinds of ministers haven't been removed, but rather be there still. But this is another term they could have, and they do not need to worry about politics or re-election this time. They could do more for constructive future of Japan and possibly with its neighbors. But how much convincing do you think that could be, Mr. Kato?
Yeah, I think we can focus on the connectivity between domestic politics and foreign affairs. I think I'm looking at the improvement between China and South Korea in these days. I think this is good for regional stability, because now for Japan at least, the biggest problem and biggest challenge is North Korea. How to tackle North Korea. This is a direct and most serious challenge for Japanese security. So in this sense, like some other guests mentioned, every parties, including China, South Korea, and United States, we need to work together. We need to learn from what's happening previously. So I think now, for Shinzo Abe, we now stabilized in domestic. I think China as well. And in this situation, how to implement our diplomacy with more cooperative and constructive ways, and to put more political capital to promote the foreign negotiation. This is what Shinzo Abe is trying to do. And I think upcoming Trump's visit to Asia, first Japan, South Korea, and China, I think this is a great chance to strengthen and promote the mutual trust among the leaders. This is my basic expectation.
Mr. Kuznick, not only the bilateral trip that President Trump is going to take in Northeast Asia, Japan, South Korea, China, but also during the APEC, which is the Asia-Pacific Economic Forum and the platform, all these countries will once again gather together to figure out some of the things. So, Mr. Kuznick, are opportunities for them to seek a new path? China now, after the 19th Party Congress, the leadership of the CPC Central Committee has been very clear to the outside world. This could also be another new stage for China to develop further relationship with its neighbors. But Mr. Kuznick, do we see much hope from all parties to make it happen?
I think that Kato-san is more optimistic than I am. I see a dangerous alliance in many ways between the United States and Japan right now, especially. That's going to heighten the level of belligerency and the chance for a confrontation. The way I see it, it's actually in Shinzo Abe's interest to maintain a crisis atmosphere. Abe's main goal throughout his career has been to revise Article 9, get rid of Article 9, or at least to neutralize it and to increase Japan's forces. Yes, Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, the peace constitution. It's a wonderful thing. The United States helped implement it in 1947, and under that, Japan gives up the right to belligerency. It rejects the right to war. It rejects the right to have offensive military forces.
That's right.
It should be a model for the rest of the world. And Abe's committed to getting rid of it. But in order to do so, he's got to maintain a level of fear in the Japanese population. So from Abe's standpoint, the best thing that's happened is Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump, with his aggressive policies toward North Korea, his threatening of North Korea, his saying he's going to bring fire and fury down on North Korea, totally destroy the country, I mean, that's actually playing into Abe's hands, as is the similar belligerency on the part of Kim Jong-un and North Korea. So, and Trump's presidency is still something that we haven't seen before from the United States. The policies are really not that different yet, but the tone, the rhetoric, the bluster, the threatening, the rash, reckless behavior that we're seeing from Trump is something new and something different. So we all want to see diplomacy. We want to see this resolved diplomatically, because we know that there is no military solution that would not be an utter catastrophe for humanity. But we don't see that kind of wisdom coming from the Trump administration, especially Trump himself.
There is one way to judge it, whether or not that's going to happen. That is, of course, with the upcoming visit. Mr. Yang, final words from you as well. What do you think could be some of the initiatives that would help us to really see the true colors of parties as to what kind of region they are seeking for during the coming, let's say, wins world visit by U.S. President Donald Trump in Northeast Asia region?
Maintain the consensus between China and U.S. on the denuclearization on the North Korean issue, and try to expanding the pies of China-U.S. trade relations to avoid the trading war between the two, and meanwhile, through the APEC, enhancing the free trade investment in the region.
Well, for now, I guess we have already got some lists to see what's going to happen and to assess the upcoming visits. And thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us and helping us with all of your insights. Xiyu in Beijing, Peter Kuznick in Washington, D.C., and Yoshikazu Kato, also in D.C., originally from Japan. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. And you're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, still to come on our live program.